Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about JASMY because obviously, like everything else in the market, JASMY's gone up a pretty decent amount, and so I wanted to look into it a little bit further and basically take an assessment of like, is it doing well, is it doing bad, is it kind of lagging, is it leading, all that type of stuff. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive right in just so we can kind of move through this because I know there's a ton to talk about. So starting out, what we can see here is JASMY, we can see up 20% on the week. Obviously good. Anything being up 20% on the week is obviously fantastic, but we can see, I mean, it's definitely lagging behind some of these other things. Obviously, it's been trailing Bitcoin. Not a huge concern just because Bitcoin usually leads the way up before we get into alt season, but we can see other things, like Uniswap, Caspa, Theta, Crow, Ethereum, Near. Most of these are up above that 20% level. So lagging a little bit, not the best news, but what we can see is if we do look at the chart, we can see that it did actually kind of move up close to probably 30 or 40%, but it's kind of pulled back. We saw kind of a local high of about 2.4 cents roughly. Did not break the high that we saw in late September where we got to about 2.5 cents, but decent move up. Obviously, we kind of broke out of this like descending trend line that we saw. If we were to draw it, you could see it kind of goes from like here to there. Obviously, we broke out of that, which is really good news. But we can see, obviously strong pump up, but a decent sell-off to follow, which is not necessarily the best news. We can see RSI is recovering because of that. It did get very, very close to being overbought, but it's now kind of pulled back more into the range. What we're looking for is very similar to what we've been seeing very frequently on Bitcoin recently, which is obviously we want the RSI to pull back kind of more than the price goes down. That's happening kind of a little bit, but not to the level that I think we'd want to see. That's something that we're going to be keeping an eye on and monitoring. We could see that the Bollinger Bands were starting to squeeze, and so obviously usually when these start to squeeze super, super tight, we do see kind of some more price volatility and action going. It did kind of break down similar to like what we saw in the ICP video yesterday. We saw that things were kind of breaking down, but then obviously we saw that massive pump up. And so overall, things are... They're looking decent. What we can see, most importantly, at least in my opinion, is we are seeing volume start to creep back in. It's very, very small, not very meaningful, kind of like what we saw in the past, but it is probably up about maybe 2 times what we were seeing kind of in this downtrend area. So obviously this extra volume is very, very nice. I do think that as kind of Bitcoin continues to find new highs, the overall alt market continues to go up. As we've seen on a couple of videos that I've done recently, basically the everything in crypto excluding Bitcoin market is still, we probably could see about 50 to 60% gains to return to previous all-time highs. We haven't even seen highs that we saw earlier this year in like mid to late March. So there is still definitely plenty of room to run. So the fact that JASMY has been somewhat of a lagger compared to some of these others that we've seen in the market isn't necessarily too concerning. However, I do think one of the major issues that we're seeing here is communication. We haven't seen a ton of communication, and so we're going to get into that here in a second. We're also going to be looking at some recent news, but before we get into that, if you are interested, as you can see, I am doing most of my charting and a lot of this stuff I do on Margex. You can see I do trade on Margex. I do have a trade open for Bitcoin. This is a 30x long. It's up about 85%. Not too bad. I'm just kind of letting that one run for right now. Obviously, in times like this where we're seeing a lot of price action and a lot of movement, particularly when it's kind of being like up only, now can be a really, really easy time, frankly, to do really quite well, especially when you're trading leverage. You just have to make sure that you don't get over leveraged. But if you are interested, please check out the links in my description below. As for Margex specifically, there is no KYC or VPN needed, so you can essentially just go on ahead and get signed up and start trading, which is really nice because it doesn't take all that time to like get approved and all that type of stuff, which is nice, particularly in a market like this where it seems like Bitcoin's up another $1,000 every 15 minutes or so, right? So that is something that is really nice. They also do up to $10,000 in deposit bonuses as well. So if you are interested, feel free to check that out. Now, what we can see is in the recent news of JASMY, well, that's just it, there isn't, right? The most recent news that we saw from the JASMY team directly was at the end of August. So we are going on about 2.5, getting close to 3 months now of no like official news from the JASMY team, which frankly is not a great look. I'm hoping that we see kind of some more news coming in the somewhat near future, just because particularly with a lot of these types of projects, a lot of this moves on news and on interaction and on marketing and a lot of that type of stuff. You could have the best project in the whole world, but if nobody knows about it or nobody's excited or anything like that, then that's obviously a whole different issue, right? And so going back, I did want to kind of give us a refresher of how JASMY works specifically, so we can kind of be reminded of kind of what the long-term goal is, despite some of these issues that we're seeing with communication. And essentially things kind of center around this personal data locker and merchants being able to effectively use the data that you contribute to your personal data locker, and they essentially pay you in JASMY coin, and that's what gives JASMY coin value. Additionally, we do have this extra step where you can use it as a digital currency. They're trying very hard to put in different mechanisms kind of within the JASMY ecosystem. It may not be the JASMY coin exactly, but essentially kind of like a USDC type of thing, but for the yen specifically. And so I think if JASMY can do that and pull that off, that would be a fantastic development within the ecosystem. But overall, things kind of mainly rely on this: the personal data locker. Will people use the personal data locker? How does it interact? How are people able to effectively monetize their data, right? Because currently our data is essentially being stolen from us. And so having the ability to monetize our data is definitely, in my opinion, something that's super, super important. And if JASMY can be the ones that figure it out, then that to me, I think makes a ton of sense. So what we can see going back to this JASMY ecosystem is that is kind of mainly what we're looking for. And then from there, that is kind of where the value accrual of the JASMY coin happens. Now, given the lack of communication from the team recently, there is this app that I use. It's called MaxData.app. I can also drop a link to that as well in the description. But what we can see here is essentially kind of like an aggregation, a recent aggregation of people talking about JASMY. And so what we can see recently is some of these more recent articles, people are starting to have somewhat of concern with the JASMY coin, right? And I think we kind of saw that earlier looking at the chart. Volume continues to drop. It kind of lags behind some of these other leaders that we're seeing in the market. There's not a lot of news coming out. All of these are kind of, I would say, somewhat worrying signs for the health and stability of the coin. I do still believe in the idea and think that the idea is fantastic, but the problem is you have to be able to deliver as well, right? And so if you're not able to deliver, then that's a whole different issue all its own. But what we can see is, we've seen kind of some scary bearish signals, which we have kind of seen and talked about before on the channel. Overall, though, mainly it's more about holding support, right? And when we're talking about holding support, again, some of these were about a week ago. So, recently we have seen kind of this really nice move to the upside. But when you're talking about holding support kind of at the lower bound, when a lot of these other projects that are really starting to grab attention and catch, kind of some of the mainstream attention within the crypto space, it's not always a great look. And so this is something that I'm always constantly keeping an eye on. If you are interested as well, you can take a look at MaxData. I do think it is kind of a nice place for aggregating news and also aggregating charts and different like indicators. They have buy, sell alerts, things like that. So overall, it's a relatively useful app, but mainly I really like it to kind of aggregate the news, see what people are talking about, how they're talking about it, things like that. I do think it is kind of interesting, particularly with JASMY, where we don't necessarily get a whole ton of updates coming from the team, which generally is a little bit unusual. Also, we have seen a lot of retail interest leaving from JASMY, which is another issue because there's just not as much like news to talk about, things like that. And so I think it's important when we're seeing this type of stuff to just stay focused on what is the actual goal of the project, how are they doing it, are they like successfully executing, a lot of that type of stuff. Obviously, we can't really tell if they're successfully executing right now just because of lack of communication. But hopefully, since the bull run is obviously in full effect, as we've seen over the past week or so, the team does kind of start to catch on to this and realize and notice the momentum and kind of work with that and kind of hopefully continue to push the project along. So anyway, hopefully the information in this video was useful. If it was, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out with growing the channel and reaching more people and all that type of good stuff. I do try to cover very recent and frequent updates both on JASMY as well as other happenings and news and stuff within the ecosystem, as well as some other projects that I find useful and helpful and other kind of personal favorites of mine. So anyway, if this is all useful and helpful information, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me a ton. So also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything, you have anything you want me to talk about or see or stuff like that, dropping something in the comment section would be the best way to do that. I do try to read and respond to all those. So if you have anything you want me to see, that'd be the best way. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.